Hello, and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma, and today we have a very interesting guest. I think is very useful for every kind of up and coming developer, from basically beginning up to senior. And it's Shelley Benhoff. Hello, welcome, Shelley. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on because we met from Courtney, and she gave me said who you're interested to have him come on, and I just went through their back catalog and found so many, and then I remember seeing this one. And I thought actually this is super useful because nobody ever talks about kind of the soft skills. It's something that's really kind of untouched. Before we get into your book, I think it's always good to kind of get into who are you, who is Shelley, why should we listen to you? Do you mind if you can give a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I have been in the tech industry for 25 years at this point. So I've been through a lot of career transitions, and it wasn't always easy. I've been a trainer and an author for Pluralsight and LinkedIn. Pluralsight I have been with for almost 10 years, and LinkedIn for about 2 years. And I love to teach because I don't want people to struggle as I did, you know, because moving through from technical positions to leadership was very, very difficult for me. So I wrote this lead developer career guide because there's nothing like it out there. Every resource is for engineering managers and not actually lead devs who are in charge of, the technical architecture, but then also leadership, like talking to stakeholders and mentoring, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm just passionate about every topic I teach, obviously. So yeah, I think that's a good introduction to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, sometimes I also think about kind of leaving some knowledge. I'm actually learning a somewhat newer framework, and the documentation's quite bad. So I've been actually using some spare time to kind of take all the time where I get confused and get stuck, and once I figure out how to do what I want to do, then I go back and try to make the docs better so nobody else has the same issue as me. It's very useful. And I think you can probably
Mhm.
relate that to the same thing about, your career guide, right? You made many mistakes. I think you learned to do what you need to do by doing what you shouldn't be doing, right? I don't know if that's you or me, but that's usually me.
Yeah, same. I find that the best advice I was ever given was really that you learn more through failure than success, unfortunately. But failure, and you shouldn't really call it failure because at least you tried something. The only failure is really just not trying in the first place. It is something that people do to kind of wait and see what happens, but it isn't always great for your team. So it's important to know kind of what to do up front, but then also learn to roll with the punches, just kind of learn from actual experience. Yeah.
I mean, we're all going to make mistakes, but there has to be a point where, you can't always just keep doing, the quote unquote wrong thing up until you start doing the right thing, right? Because sometimes, they may take a lot of misses before you get the right hit. If you ever get the right hit, if you ever do the right thing at one point. But I mean, there must be other ways to do this, like such as having like a mentor, or what do you kind of recommend if you're starting to go in from a typical developer behind the keyboard to now doing more mentorship or even leading a team? So, what kind of steps do you think people should start to follow? What should people start to do?
Yeah. Excellent question. The first thing you should absolutely do is have a team of mentors, not just one. You want to cultivate a team because everyone's experiences are different, right? So it's important to kind of draw inspiration from multiple genders and leadership types. There are a lot of different leadership types, and I have a whole section of that in my book. And it's, I I guess, once you have a mentor, you can, or mentors, you can lean on them to kind of tell them what your issues are, what questions you have, and that is a important step. The other thing that you should do is ask your team what they want. Just be direct and ask them for their feedback on your performance as well. It can be anonymous or not. If it's an extremely small team, making it anonymous is a little bit difficult. But if it's a larger team, then yeah, it's just good to allow people the chance to tell the truth, because sometimes if you're just asking specific people for that feedback, they might not tell the truth to your face, because either they're afraid of getting fired or they're just trying to be polite, which happens a lot. You really want that sort of blunt feedback. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes it isn't what you wanted to hear, but perhaps it was what you needed to hear. And the first time that I led a team, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I was a technical person and I led a team actually. It was a small team, and they kind of mutinied against me because I had some like processes that I was using that probably weren't the best. So they just kind of went off and did their own thing. And my boss was not pleased with that. So I took steps to really dig into what the problem was and be self-aware also is very important. You have to be mature enough to take that, negative feedback and turn it into an opportunity to learn. And yeah, it's not easy to go into leadership for the first time. You definitely need to have that support from outside the company and then also inside.
What about, support from, say, like even your direct manager, right? I mean, could they even be a good mentor for you, or should you kind of leave them alone, you
Absolutely.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. Your managers, I guess, if you have kind of a engineering manager and a director on top of that, and even like the VP role, you can lean on all of them for advice. I've had many occasions in my career where I have reached out to directors that I worked for, and they've always been very open with telling me what I needed to hear. But yes, you should have that support outside and inside the company.
That kind of makes sense, but, to get on that trajectory to start to kind of move up in your career, right? Where you're, starting as a, grunt or, just a kind of a low level coder that kind of keeps their head down, keep tapping on the keyboard to start to leading a team. I mean, should that be every developer's kind of trajectory, or is that just for certain people? Or, how do you know like where you should go? Because it seems like I think there's quite a few people who actually believe that this is, the natural path and you can't really fight it. Is that something you also talk about in your book?
I do. Yeah, I have like a whole chapter on this topic. you have to know what skills you are good at, what skills you can learn with leadership, and absolutely not every dev is okay with leadership. You know, a lot of us are sort of more introverted, and that's completely fine. I used to hate this. I used to feel like everyone can lead until I started to write my book. And then I have a chapter on how do you know when it's right to lead, and how do you ask for that position and, you know, try to be successful as well. I think that what I was upset about is I've known so many developers that would be great leaders, but are too scared to, right? And I feel like, at least in my career did not start until I got out of my comfort zone and I started to speak at events and just really take on more soft skills, especially with communication type skills. And yeah, I wasn't comfortable at first, but for me, I knew that leadership was something that I was meant for because I had had a lot of managers who pushed me into it. I had one manager specifically, the way that he let me know that I was leadership material was that he had me lead meetings. And it was a nice kind of calm push up into that leadership position. And once I was comfortable with that, I started taking on meetings with clients, which is definitely, I think, the hardest part about being a lead dev because we are really technical people, and it's important to know how to speak to clients who are maybe not so technical, but then also speak to clients that are extremely technical. I'm sorry, I think I went off on a tangent there for a minute.
No, no, that's good. I mean, is it possible that you could want to be in a leadership kind of role, but then you just don't have, the right,
Mindset.
yeah, mindset?
Yeah,
Is
absolutely. That happens a lot. Sometimes people try to take on a leadership role and just don't have that support or especially the mindset at the starting in about chapter 1, I think I talk about what type of people have personalities that lend well to leadership. The number one thing you have to get rid of is ego. You're not a leader to, you know, be an overlord for your team. You actually, it's the opposite. You support them instead. I've had, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have had terrible managers in their career. I've had quite a few, and their problem was mainly that ego and having to be right all the time, never listening to criticism, not being self-aware, and not taking any kind of feedback on, you know, internal processes and just the overall team camaraderie. If you have a toxic manager, you'll have a toxic team. And by saying that, I mean managers who, especially, this is one problem I've seen at a lot of jobs I've had where people were literally afraid to talk to devs. That is a failure at the management level. No one should ever be afraid to come to you and ask a question. You have to be the type of person that will take time to answer instead of like, that's a stupid question. I can't believe, they're asking. Yeah, so you also have to be patient, I'd say. It is difficult to explain technical concepts to people who are not devs, but you have to keep in mind that people who are not devs are still technical. I've worked with project managers that would ask technical questions, and I took time to explain it in a way they understand. And I usually use like analogies because it makes it more relatable. So yeah, self-awareness and patience, and just being able to work with people and not have people work for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm also kind of thinking in my mind, like, if you're going for this leadership position and you also have, a teammate who's, say, maybe the same, level as you or even a little bit more senior, and they also want the leadership position, but then you get the position. How can you kind of handle this situation? Because that could be quite tricky, right? Because, I don't know how you can handle that. Do you have, some kinds of ideas for something like this kind of problem?
Absolutely. This actually happened to me the first time I was a leader. The other person that applied actually kind of had more experience than me, but my personality was less combative and more, team oriented. And for quite a while, having her on the team was very difficult because she was strong-willed, I'll call it. And through just I would have conversations with her and take her advice and thank her for that as well. I was able to turn it around, and this was like 13 years ago, and we still talk. So I turned kind of a, I don't want to say enemy because I wouldn't call her that, but that's kind of the closest term. Adversary. I turned her into a lifelong friend, and I think that is actually my greatest achievement as a leader because I didn't have experience leading at the time, and it was just especially hard that I had applied to this position at the same time as her. And then after I left, actually, she took on that role. And then, like a year later, she messaged me and said, I had no idea how ridiculous that position was. We didn't have the right support. We were expected to produce work at a, quick pace, and that wasn't always possible. And it also caused a reduction in quality of our work. And yeah, it was hard, but taking her advice and really asking her was the absolute key here to forging an alliance and a friendship.
That's a sign of a really good leader, in my opinion. I actually had the same situation happen to me where, I knew there was some shenanigans going on in the background, and he was just good at kind of, I guess I would put it as like a dam, kind of blocking the water. And then once he got terminated, I was promoted to his position. And then I really saw, the kind of craziness that was there. And I was like, wow, the fact that he was able to kind of block us from all this stuff. is really shows how good he was. So I really can relate to your story in terms of, seeing her side. That's also kind of like another good question, like if you do have somewhere that you run into, you're in a leadership position, the situation's not good. I mean, how do you know who to talk to and what to do about it? Like if you actually need somebody from up above, like in the ladder of your company, do you have any kind of tips for this part?
Yeah, this is a hard part because as a lead dev, you're not in charge of um, hiring or firing, really. So if you do have a problem on your team, you have to take it to either your manager or HR. I'd say I have done both. I think taking it to HR is a drastic step, and that should not be handled lightly. And if HR is constantly hearing your complaints, then that reflects on you. Sometimes the problem isn't the actual person, it's the environment. And if you are in a toxic environment, then your team members will kind of revolt, you know. Yeah, toxicity presents itself. The other thing is that if you are not comfortable telling your manager, again, that is a reflection on them. Your manager should have a open door policy at all times. And I would always, if you have a problem with a person on your team, then at first you should try to take care of it yourself. I would say maybe ask your mentors, tell them what's happening, and meet with that person one on one and just have a very candid conversation. Tell them that you're concerned depending on what the problem is, if it's performance based or if it's attitude. I would say it's a lot easier to correct performance than a person's general attitude because that's just their personality and it probably is all the time. And yeah, it's it's very hard to toe that line. And I would say that getting HR involved, again, that is a drastic step. You should absolutely have the support of your manager. And maybe if you don't, start looking for another job, honestly.
When you mentioned about HR, I don't know if you've seen this recently, but I just saw a couple of days ago somebody posted on Twitter. They said, "Oh, HR in our company, they sent out a survey to see if people were feeling stressed, and they actually fired the stressful people." I forgot what was the reasoning, but yeah, they sent an email saying that, it was the actual email. They took a, screenshot of it and it was like, "Oh, we realized that some of you are stressed. We did a survey, and those of you who are overly stressed, we've just let go so that way you won't be stressed anymore." I forgot how they said it, but I was like, that sounds like
Ridiculous.
not the right thing to do. I don't know. It was very weird. I have to see if I can find the email and kind of read it again because it was just too nuts. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's absolutely terrible.
yeah, and then also they definitely said it in a way that was like, "Yeah, we know it's stressful at work, not stressful, in your own personal life." I forgot how they wrote it, but it's really nuts. I think it's a good point to really let people know that, yeah, HR is not your friend. They're kind of there to protect the company over rather than to, help you necessarily. And a lot of people don't get that until they're on the other side. It's too late for them. It's too bad, but enough. Not saying nice things about HR people. I'm sure some of them are nice, but it's just a sad fact of life. That they're there. I mean, it makes sense, right? They're being
Right.
paid by the company, so they have to, be on that side. But
Exactly. Yeah. And in terms of that survey, I mean, why wasn't it anonymous? That type of question should absolutely be anonymous, and they should try to correct that problem if, and I'm I'm wondering how many people did they let go, and how did that impact the stress level of people who stayed, because now they're expected to do multiple jobs. I have never had that experience exactly, but I have had a lot of experience where either people left or were terminated, and I was expected to do the job of like three people. There was actually a job I had where I got sick. And so, I mean, I was like really, really sick, like hospitalized a whole week. And so I came back to work after, like right after I got out of the hospital, and I was in no position to work. I was just still really sick and trying to recover. They ended up letting me go. And then I saw on their website three job openings for the one job I had. And I knew, I was like, well, I was clearly not the problem in that case, was I?
Ah, try not to dish on people, but I did wanna kinda come back. I found the picture. It's a company called Yes Madam. I believe it's a company based out of India, so maybe there's slightly different kind of rules than we have in the US, but I just kinda wanted to read the email. Just sounds really nuts. "Recently, we conducted a survey to understand your feelings about stress at work. Many of you shared your concerns, which we deeply value and respect. As a company committed to fostering a healthy and supportive work environment, we have carefully considered the feedback. To ensure that no one remains stressed at work, we have made the difficult decision to part ways with employees who indicated significant stress. The decision is effective immediately, and impacted employees will receive further details separately. Thank you for your contributions." Such an HR email. Sorry, the way they wrote it was very much an HR email. From what I've seen before, it's really oof, give me the chills just to see this kind of email.
Yeah. How can they say they want to support people and then fire them? Like that
I
doesn't make any sense.
Again, the colleague, right? He's from France, and he told me, they have this expression that if you want to kill a dog or get rid of the dog, just say the dog has rabies. Just say whatever just to make a justification to let go of somebody. I mean, it could just be. I mean, they didn't really publish what each person had, so maybe they just said, "Oh, this person has significant stress," but maybe everybody's stress. You just choose the ones that you want to get rid of. I don't know, but I just hope that those people find a better place. But
Yeah,
kind of
me
coming back to
too.
this one, another important thing that people always think about when they get into a leadership role, which is, usually you're used to, okay, I have a team I have to manage, I have stakeholders I have to deal with. But sometimes they also forget about what's called managing up, right? And that's something that I've always never really been that great about. Yeah, I could see you also like, yes, this is important.
Oh yeah,
Can you
it
give a little
is.
bit of a talk about this and some tips about managing up and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. Managing up is like making sure that you have that support from your managers, directors, and upwards if you have access to, C-suite executives, which generally that's not as common, but especially for your direct manager, they should be open to sort of asking your opinions on their performance, but sometimes if they're not, you sort of have to approach that gently. I would say, well, maybe gently. I'm gentle, but some people and some cultures are a lot more blunt. So, that's just how it is. But your manager should absolutely know what you think at all times, your opinions, not just on kind of the technical aspects of your job, but also supporting you learning leadership and then also helping them to be successful as well. Because at the end of the day, managers are kind of the team's shield. So, like you said earlier, having a person shield you from all of the crap that goes on in management is something that good leaders do. I would say do that to an extent, but also remain transparent. That's a really thin line to adhere to, but your manager should be successful with your assistance.
It's very true. It is also like a team effort kind of thing. One of the things I think is quite tricky to do where, you have some information that you wanna, like, somehow relay from, it could be, okay, the project's falling behind because, somebody on your team did something not so good, to where maybe, that's one side of the coin. Now, the totally opposite side of the coin could be, "Oh, my, manager has asked me to select somebody to let go from our team because they're having budget constraints." I mean, how can I properly handle these kinds of situations, in a way that I can both be a good person for both my team and for my direct kind of manager, right? Do you have any kind of, tips of how I can juggle, being my team's friend and not the enemy, and then also still working with the boss and not be on his bad side?
Exactly. This is something that I struggled with as a leader. You should not be a people pleaser. You will never be able to please everybody. That's just how it is. And if you do please everybody, kudos to you, because that is something that I struggled with at first. I was a people pleaser to the extent that I sort of lied about stuff to my team, trying to shield them and protect their feelings overall. But you just can't do that all the time. And it's also important to note that you cannot always please your manager, even. It's I'm trying to think of a example I had. I feel like I went to a manager about our project schedule was just too tight, and they were adamant, like it has to be done. It just has to. And so I asked for more resources, and I was able to get a person from the product team on to kind of walk us through the architectural approach, and that helped a lot. But yeah, it just pleasing people is not what you want to do. You have to get used to having conversations that are not so comfortable for either of you and a team member. So you have to go into these conversations using I statements, not like you're doing a bad job, you're slacking, you're not learning continuously. Instead, you would say, like, I am concerned, I want to know how to help you. And that really allows the person you're speaking to not be defensive, to be more open to this type of communication. And sometimes they won't be. Sometimes a person is just not a good fit. And at that point, after you try and try and try, if the person is still not improving, then it would be time to tell your manager that they aren't right and should be terminated. I don't like those conversations. I've had that happen to me once, and yeah, it was just not pleasant because then you also consider that when a person is terminated, you generally aren't part of that meeting. It's usually between HR and the manager instead, who's actually, in charge of that whole termination process. So yeah, very, very hard, not pleasant, but has to be done.
Yeah, nobody wants to be, the bad guy, right? So, especially
Right.
if it's like somebody who is rather well liked, I think that one's really really tricky. You have to kind of balance that part. Yeah, I was also in a position where actually I learned quite a few years after it all happened that actually maybe because I was let go from a position for something that didn't quite make a lot of sense. I'm not going to go into the details because it's just making me puzzled, and also it's not super important. But what was interesting is that something didn't always really didn't make sense about it, and everybody I told the story it didn't also understand. But then again, that's my side. But what actually ended up happening is that former colleague came to me and he said, "Oh, because originally I wanted to leave that team and go to another team, and this former colleague who was in a different team came up to me and he said, "Hey, listen, I want to tell you something that I've been wanting to say for several years. This is what I heard." And he said, "Okay, basically, they found a way to let go of you because your manager wanted to do that because if you quit or if you were fired, he could get a replacement person for his team, but if you switch teams, he could not get a replacement team member." Yeah, exactly. That's how banks work, right? So,
So puzzling. Yeah.
yeah, so I was like,
I,
to be honest, it makes the most sense because at least everything else, when I ran through my mind, it didn't really make a lot of sense, but I don't know. So this kind of stuff is don't know what to do, you know. So, but yeah, that's kind of my little story. That's
yeah.
also like another tricky thing, like that's another situation of matching up. It's like, well, how can I, I tried making it work for so many months, and it just wasn't a good fit for me. How to actually, talk with your manager and even move to another place, or in this case, maybe because if I would have talked to him sooner, maybe things would have happened the same, but even sooner. I don't know. This is a really tricky thing to deal with,
Yeah.
and
I feel like it sounds like management failed you, which does happen quite a bit. The other thing you can keep in mind is that as a organizational practice, some companies will trade a expensive senior dev for a less experienced, like mid level, because it's cheaper. However, they do not take into account the cost of turnover because when you take away a person who has experience, who has worked at the organization for a while, like a year or more, they have that expertise in your specific team practices, your processes, your style of code, architecture, all of that stuff. Taking in a new person who is cheaper actually turns out to be more expensive. So that practice is dumb. And the other thing companies do that I absolutely hate is they refuse to hire junior developers. How are we ever going to get senior developers and leaders if you don't hire junior developers and teach them and train them? And then also, they are the cheapest, right? So having that kind of team with people at multiple levels is very important because sometimes juniors who are, fresh out of college or a boot camp, they might have a perspective that you never even considered. Their skills are newer, they're fresh, they don't have the experience on teams to take on, more challenging projects and having that opportunity to teach the next generation of devs is the most rewarding thing that I have ever done. I've mentored over like 100 people. I couldn't pick them out of a lineup probably, but I always tell them that the hardest part of that job is finding your first jobs, plural. Usually, people like to hire devs with like 5 years of experience. But yeah, sorry, went off on a tangent again. This is something that I'm passionate about, hiring junior devs. But then when you have to terminate someone, it isn't great experience, but you have to do everything you can to try to rectify the situation. I'm sorry, I don't even know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I think you did indirectly. We're similar in the fact that sometimes we go around the question, or I don't know, not go around like that, but circle around it and talk through it and stuff. So I understand what you're saying. Is it ever okay to, I want to say the word embellish, right? Where you can kind of talk up your skills a bit, you know, but in a realistic way. We already talked about, oh, everybody wants these, developers who are, fresh out, 8 or 22 years old, right? And but then they have 30 years experience, which is just not possible, right? But at the same time, I mean, can you maybe say some things that are not necessarily wrong or even not true, but maybe you can say them in a nicer way or a better way? I'm not sure if this makes sense to you or not, because, sometimes you need to kind of get your foot in the door. I feel like no matter what, it sounds like lying, but it's not what I'm trying to say. But do you understand what I'm trying to say? Where it's like you kind of talk up a little bit about your skills, but not so much that it's just unbelievable or, like way out of scope.
That's an interesting question. I guess I don't have a lot of experience with embellishing because, from my perspective, I have always really suffered from imposter syndrome. And when I tell that to people, they're very surprised. I'm an author, I'm a conference speaker, but it happens to all of us. But then on the flip side, if you embellish your skills, if you say like, I'm excellent at speaking with stakeholders, even though you don't really have experience, but in your mind you think you could, and you're confident in that, which can happen, but you have to tread lightly because you don't want to just outright lie. Like you said, there are people on resumes who sort of, you know, embellish certain skills. Like if I have experience writing C# or Java, and I say that I worked on a specific feature or task that I had a lot of help with, but I don't put that, I word it to make it sound like it was all me. That is a very bad thing to do, but it's also hard to not do that when you want a job so badly, and especially now when there are not a lot of jobs available too. So I would try to steer clear of, outright lying, but if you embellish just a little, I think that that's okay. Just don't embellish to the point where you will be handed tasks that you absolutely cannot do.
Maybe this is a little more kind of down, or a little more, how do you say, down to earth, but a little more realistic kind of question, right? Let's say that you've done the research, you've talked to other people, and you know how to say scale a website to 100 users. but you've only ever worked at startups that never had any users. So is it, I mean, how can you, because sometimes you people are advertising, I've seen it on there before, they say must have experience with, 1,000 K users, or, K 1K users, right? I mean, that it kinda sucks that maybe you know what to do, but at the same time, you never had the experience because it just so happens that the positions that you chose, they just never got to that kinda scale, right? So, can you say, well, I mean, usually what actually I end up doing is I would just I'm saying like, "Okay, no, I haven't had the experience, but I do know how to handle it," which usually the reply, like, on the face and the attitude is just like, "Well, this is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody with, actual experience."
Yeah,
Maybe it's a little bit more kind of realistic kind of, question, I think that's a little bit tricky to deal with.
it is tricky. When you're writing a resume, you can put a section for what it is you're looking for and put in those keywords, scaling and all of that stuff. You could also look for community projects that are similar, but of course, that's hard in a short time. The other thing I want to say is job descriptions, the quote required skills, and I can tell you this as a hiring manager myself, you'll never get anybody that has every skill that you're looking for. So when you're applying for jobs, you don't necessarily have to have experience in every skill, but definitely take the ones that you know you can do and try to do a personal project. And then, you know, on your resume, you can link your repo to that as a actual code example. But yeah, you can do either community projects or on your own if that skill is just necessary, which generally I would say skills that are necessary are related to the specific tech stack, but most tech stacks have several, languages. You have front end, you have back end, and DevOps. There are multiple positions that lend themselves to specific, languages and stuff like that. Like, for example, with me, I am learning Python and Java. I would never apply for a job that required like 10 years of either, but I would apply for jobs that were looking for more of like a mid-level. Well, I personally wouldn't apply to jobs, just the royal we. But yeah, definitely make sure that anything on your resume is accurate and you're looking for those skills that are required in the job description that you can actually do.
I also know that sometimes, and this is even personal, I'm sure you've seen it too, where it's like, you tell HR or something, "Oh, I need a developer to write Java," or whatever, and then they go, use ChatGPT or just, I don't know, Google search back in the day, and then they hand you back this JD, and you're like, "What kind of person are you looking for? This doesn't even make sense," or, like, you're looking for somebody who's, like, impossible. I remember at DHH who wrote Ruby on Rails, he made a conference talk at the beginning, and he showed this job posting that was like, must have 15 years of Ruby on Rails experience, and he's like, "Oh, I just made it." It was like just a 15 year of like, of Ruby on Rails, where it's like, "Okay, we just got it. Now I can finally apply for the Library of Congress position over here." Like, it's just amazing, these some of these job descriptions that happen.
It
But,
is crazy, yeah. Like, I'll see a whole lot people asking for, quote, required skills like I don't know, Angular, 20 years of experience, or Angular hasn't been around that long. And when you see that, you definitely know that the hiring manager didn't really write that job description. It was probably HR. And the other thing that I absolutely hate is asking for a specific amount of years of experience because that lends itself to ageism. In that case, you're looking for a person that has, 10 years of experience, is in their 30s or so. Yeah, that I absolutely do not like as a hiring practice. I would prefer to see more required skills that are experience based instead, like what kind of projects you've worked on, because I know a lot of juniors who are a lot smarter than me, you know, that can just code around me in circles. And yeah, it isn't always years of experience. It's the actual jobs you've done, the projects you've worked on instead.
That's a very good point, Shelley. Well, we are reaching the end of our time over here. I feel like we barely even scratched the surface of your book. Maybe I can just give you kind of the last word. Or is there something that you wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to? I think you did send me some topics, but we kind of covered, I'm sure, a lot more than what you put in those points.
The one thing that we kind of glossed over was emotional intelligence. I think to kind of tie up everything that we've talked about with leadership, when you're managing upward or uh, your actual team, you have to realize that people don't always tell the truth. Sometimes they're afraid of losing their job or uncomfortable with direct conversations. You have to be in tune with their body language, their eye contact, to really see if they are uncomfortable or not, and then try to make them as comfortable as possible. And I guess just to wrap up about my book, it is definitely for people at any level of experience. You could read it as a junior, as kind of a career path mapping. You can read it as a senior who is applying for a lead job. You could be in that position already and just need some assistance to be successful. And then at the same time, if you're a engineering manager, you could purchase this as a gift for all of your team, I would say.
I feel like it's a gift that, can go for any occasion, right? Not just for the holiday season coming up.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some valuable tidbits in here, and listening to you, when we're kind of asking questions, talking back and forth, I can definitely hear that you have a definitely a lot of experience. I know some of it was, the old tried and true bowling gutter ball method, which I think both of us have went through, but also some things that you just kind of heard from other people. So you really kind of wrote this book from firsthand experience and probably also second, third hand experiences too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was great to have you on. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for the the book. We'll probably have a discount code for people who are interested to level up their career. The book is available on Manning. If you're going to buy this book, definitely buy it from Manning directly, because if you buy from Amazon, there's less of a cut going to the author, and because it usually goes to Jeff. Jeff doesn't need a 16th yacht, I think. So if you're going to buy this book, definitely buy it directly from Manning, and I'll see about including a discount code for them. And Shelly, it was great to have you on, and hopefully we'll have another. Maybe your next book we'll have you back on again in the future.
Yes, thank you so much.